Hello, everyone. I'm just going to get started. My name is Gen Kanai. I'm with Namco Brands. I'm here to talk about trends in blockchain gaming in Japan. So I'll be talking about, obviously, trends in blockchain gaming in Japan. I'll do a quick overview of Japan's crypto market. You may be familiar with it, but if you're coming in from outside of Japan and you're not as familiar with Japan, I'll do a quick overview. I'll do a quick overview of the games market in Japan. I think Japanese games are popular around the world, but you may not know some specifics of the Japanese games market. And then I'll talk about blockchain gaming in Japan as of today. So why am I doing this presentation? I'm a director at Namco Brands, focusing on partnerships and investments. I've been with the firm 5 years. We've done over 420 investments in blockchain. Some of our more prominent investments are very early investor in OpenSea, very early investor in Dapper Labs, very early investor in Sky Mavis, the people who make Axie Infinity. And one of our own studios, a subsidiary company, is the games platform Sandbox, which is another very popular blockchain game. And we, as a company, we run over 15 blockchain games. We're developing and running over 15 blockchain games ourselves. So we run a lot of blockchain games. We build a lot of blockchain games. We invest in a lot of blockchain games. This is what we're very keen on. For those of you who are in Japan, you're very familiar with Japan as a games market, and I think most people are pretty familiar with Japanese games just because of the popularity of PlayStation and Nintendo's platforms. But it's the third largest games market in the world, behind the US and China. It's actually the highest average revenue per user. So it's actually the most profitable games market in the world per user. Japanese people love games and they pay, and that's not necessarily true in other markets. So it's a very important market because if you can have a hit game in Japan, it's a very profitable market to have a hit game. And of course, as I mentioned before, globally popular platforms like Sony and Nintendo have their console platforms. And then there are many, many other Japanese games developers. The other thing that's probably obvious to a lot of people, certainly to young people today, is that Japan is the home of major IP holders, especially in manga and anime. Manga and anime, when I was a kid, they were it was a very niche thing, and people didn't watch manga, or kids didn't watch manga and anime. But certainly since the advent of streaming platforms like Netflix and Crunchyroll and those, manga and anime are now just globally popular, and the owners of those IPs are all in Japan. And then finally, Japan has a huge mobile games market. A lot of the biggest mobile gaming companies are Japanese. So just a quick overview of the mobile games ecosystem. Of course, in the Web 2 space, we go through gatekeepers like Google and Apple, but there are 40 to 50 publicly traded Japanese gaming companies, from Bandai Namco and Sega and Konami to middle-sized ones like Gumi and Mixi and CyberAgent. And then on the private side, there are a lot of smaller gaming companies that are doing both Web 2 and blockchain games in the market. So it's a very, very vibrant market, a lot of competition, a lot of collaboration between companies. In terms of the crypto market in Japan, again, you may be familiar with Japan as a crypto market because of some early, very high-profile hacks. But Japan was one of the early markets to embrace cryptocurrencies. Unfortunately, there was the 2013 Mt. Gox hack and then the 2018 coin check hack. Both were very, very large hacks. And because of that, the national regulator stepped in and started creating a lot of regulations that have both helped and hurt the growth of cryptocurrencies in Japan. Some of the regulations are pretty restrictive, and that has unfortunately limited some of the growth of certain aspects of cryptocurrencies and blockchain gaming, to be frank. But the benefit of having a strict regulator was really apparent most recently when FTX collapsed. So before FTX collapsed, they had purchased a Japanese exchange called Coin. And the regulator in Japan had very strict regulations such that the Japanese exchange had to keep the cryptocurrencies separate from the rest of the cryptocurrencies that FTX had. So, in fact, the FTX Japan customers will be getting all of their crypto back, whereas I think that's probably not going to be true for FTX users elsewhere. So it's good and it's bad. I think it's the regulator became strict because of these early hacks in Japan, and then because of the regulation, FTX users in Japan will be made whole. So it really, if you were an FTX user in Japan, you're pretty thankful that the regulator had these regulations. In terms of tokens in Japan, there are a very limited number of tokens available in Japan at Japanese exchanges. It's like less than 50. It's a very limited selection. There's a very strict process to go through to get a token listed in Japan, and it takes both time and money to do that. And so it's a very different market from other markets in that way. The crypto winter has hit Japan as well, but not in the same way as in other markets. So as you may know, Terra Luna was obviously a huge issue last year, and then obviously the FTX collapse. Both of those really didn't affect Japan. So in many ways, Japan has really didn't get the same impact as other markets did with respect to FTX or Luna. But it's still, I would say, a pretty challenging time in the market. And then I would say publicly traded gaming companies really have a lot of restrictions around what they can do with blockchain games because of the restrictions around tokens made by the regulator. That and also accounting regulations. And then finally, from an individual basis, there's a very high tax on crypto earnings, up to 55% once you get above a certain amount. So it's, from that way, it's a pretty challenging market as well. In terms of blockchain games in Japan, CryptoKitties was arguably the first blockchain game that became popular. That's obviously not a Japanese game, but soon after CryptoKitties launched, we started seeing Japanese companies building games with NFTs. So Crypto Oink, as I think the first Japanese blockchain game, it's a pig racing game, and then a company called Double Jump released a game in 2018 called My Crypto Heroes, which is sort of a card battler game that became very popular. And then in 2019, a smaller startup called Crypto Games launched Crypto Spells. And there have been a lot of other sort of small startups releasing games. But the challenge, again, is around how to do it legally when releasing a token is either very expensive or for publicly traded companies, practically impossible. So most of the Japanese blockchain games are kind of NFT only games. And while you can make sort of a fun game with NFTs. Obviously, when you consider most sophisticated games have both items and a currency in a game, you kind of need both. You kind of need the NFTs for the items, and you need the tokens for the currency. And ideally, you would have a vibrant market where gamers can sell items to each other or buy items from other people or from the game creator with tokens. So NFT-only games can only get you so far, and that's been sort of the challenge with the Japanese market. There are 2 games tokens legal in Japan. Unfortunately, neither of them are really that relevant. Yeah. So, what has been happening because of the regulations in Japan is that some publicly listed games companies are testing, as I said before, NFT projects without tokens. Others are building projects with private blockchains. So that gets around all of the regulations. But, if you're building something that's not on a public chain, I mean, how relevant is that really? It's sort of just a database. And those projects, the ones that have been built on private blockchains, have not been popular. I won't mention the company, but it starts with an R. And then, private games companies are developing blockchain games. Some of them are moving overseas. So Japanese teams moving overseas, some to Singapore. I just spoke with a startup who told me that there are 25, not just gaming, but there are 25 Japanese startups in Dubai building various projects, both gaming and DeFi projects, just because the regulations are such that they can do that in Dubai, but they can launch a token from there, but they can't do so from Japan. And there really hasn't been a hit domestic Japanese blockchain game since My Crypto Heroes. Steppen is not a Japanese project, but it did have some popularity last year. But it kind of had that sort of typical popularity, initial popularity, and then kind of wasn't able to sustain that popularity. And then there have been some other releases since Steppen in Japan, but nothing that has really kind of broken out and become very popular. I think part of it is regulations. Part of it is the crypto winter. It is a challenging time. And then, the other big project to note is the Oasis blockchain, which is a Japanese project run out of Singapore that has a number of Korean and Japanese backers, both game developers and investors. So these are publicly listed Japanese gaming companies that have said they're going to do something in blockchain. So big companies like Bandai Namco, Sega, Square Enix, Capcom, all these companies have done or said that they're going to do something. It could be like an NFT project. It could be, a lot of them are at the moment are NFT projects. Or they say that they're going to do a metaverse or something like that. So there's, I think, a lot of interest in the space, but the regulations and certainly the investment environment right now make it a little bit challenging. So Square Enix's CEO has been talking for a number of years about wanting to do projects with NFTs. And it's been really interesting to see sort of the reaction when this news hits the Western press, the English language press. In social media, there's just a huge backlash from Western gamers who, many of them just are not interested in games with NFTs. In Asia, there's really not that much of a backlash. but there hasn't really been a successful project yet. So I think Japanese gamers or gamers in Asia are kind of in a wait and see mode, and I think they're willing to try things out. I think they're much more open to projects on blockchain. I don't think there's the hate, so to speak, that we see in social media in the West. Bandai Namco mentioned in 2022 that they were building a metaverse project around their Gundam IP, and they'll be spending over $100 million on this. So that's a big project. And as a longtime Gundam fan myself, I'm pretty excited to see what they'll be doing. It's a great IP. It hasn't had as much popularity in the West because it wasn't distributed as broadly as some other Japanese anime was. But it's a gigantic IP, certainly in Asia. And if they build something compelling, it could be a really exciting metaverse project. This is something that just came out last month, which is that even Sony is looking at patents around NFTs between games and consoles. So, if Sony's thinking about this as well, to be frank, I didn't think that Sony or Nintendo would be interested in NFTs, but it sounds like they are. So that's pretty exciting. And if we see something from Nintendo, I'll be even more surprised. But I think anything can happen. So in conclusion, I would say the Web 2 market, the traditional gaming market in Japan, is just a really vibrant, very profitable market, but is also a very competitive one. The blockchain gaming was early to start, but because of regulations and other challenges, they've largely been NFT-only games. And as I've said before, you can get some fun games built with just NFTs, but I think for the more popular games, you really do need both a token and NFTs in a game to be able to build compelling games. As I said before, these regulations around tokens and also the regulations around accounting for the publicly listed companies have really limited what certain companies can do. And so we've seen Japanese companies moving offshore to do this, to build projects. And, that's obviously not ideal. We see many industry executives and influential folks in discussions with the Japanese government and the regulators to try and create changes to regulation. And there are changes coming, but they're not coming that quickly. And then finally, I would say that Japanese gamers are playing blockchain games that are popular outside of Japan. So there's a pretty big Axie community here. There's a very big sandbox community in Japan. So if you have a popular blockchain game, you can find a lot of excited users to play that game in Japan. I wanted to thank one of my good friends, Serkan Toto. You can find me on Twitter @Gen, also on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to take some questions if there are any.